A growing number of motorists across the nation are discovering an expensive lesson about traffic enforcement, and the violation in question has nothing to do with excessive speed or disregarding traffic signals. Transportation authorities and law enforcement agencies report that citations for improper yielding to emergency vehicles have surged dramatically, with penalties now reaching $500 in numerous jurisdictions throughout the country. This enforcement trend, which has accelerated considerably in 2026, targets a driving behavior that most motorists believe they already understand. The reality, according to traffic safety officials, is that decades of informal habits have created widespread confusion about the precise legal requirements for yielding to ambulances, fire apparatus, and police vehicles responding to emergencies. Investigators examining the pattern of citations have identified a common thread among drivers who receive these costly tickets. The majority of cited motorists did attempt to yield. They recognized the approaching emergency vehicle, they made some effort to move aside, and they genuinely believed they had complied with the law. Their mistake, in most cases, involved either failing to stop completely or resuming travel before the emergency vehicle had cleared the area sufficiently. Transportation law experts emphasize that the distinction between partial compliance and full compliance has become critically important under current enforcement standards. Officers conducting traffic enforcement are no longer satisfied with seeing drivers slow down and drift toward the shoulder. They are specifically evaluating whether each driver executed a complete stop, maintained that stopped position for an appropriate duration, and resumed driving only when conditions clearly permitted safe re-entry into traffic flow. The financial consequences extend well beyond the initial citation amount. Insurance industry analysts confirm that violations of this nature typically result in points being assessed against the driver's license, which triggers automatic review by insurance underwriters. Premium increases following such citations commonly persist for 3 to 5 years, potentially adding thousands of dollars to the total cost of what began as a single traffic stop. Understanding the precise legal requirements has become essential for every motorist. When an emergency vehicle approaches from any direction while displaying activated warning lights or sounding an audible signal, drivers are legally obligated to yield the right-of-way immediately. In practical terms, this means steering toward the right edge of the roadway as safely and quickly as circumstances allow, then bringing the vehicle to a complete and full stop. The complete stop requirement deserves particular emphasis because it represents the point where most violations occur. According to enforcement data, a substantial percentage of cited drivers never actually stopped their vehicles entirely. They slowed considerably, they moved to the side, but they continued rolling forward at reduced speed. Under the law, this constitutes a violation regardless of how much the driver slowed or how far they moved from the travel lanes. Equally problematic is the tendency among drivers to resume motion immediately after the emergency vehicle passes their position. This instinct appears logical from the driver's perspective. The ambulance or fire truck has gone by, the immediate obstruction has cleared, and normal driving can resume. However, traffic safety protocols recognize that the moments immediately following an emergency vehicle's passage often present the greatest danger. Multiple vehicles may still be maneuvering back into proper lane positions. Additional emergency units may be following the initial vehicle with minimal spacing between them. Cross-traffic may be adjusting to the disruption. Drivers who accelerate too quickly during this transitional period create unpredictable hazards for everyone on the roadway. Law enforcement officers have been directed to cite drivers who demonstrate this premature acceleration pattern, even when those drivers successfully moved aside for the initial emergency vehicle. The legal standard requires remaining stopped until the emergency vehicle has passed completely and traffic conditions have stabilized sufficiently to permit safe re-entry. Intersection situations present another area where motorists frequently make costly errors. When an emergency vehicle approaches while a driver is already positioned within an intersection, the correct response is not to stop immediately within that intersection. Doing so would block cross traffic and potentially create a more dangerous obstruction than the one the driver is attempting to prevent. The proper procedure requires the driver to clear the intersection first, then execute the pullover and stop sequence once past the intersection boundaries. Citations have been issued to drivers who panicked and stopped in the middle of intersections, creating secondary hazards while attempting to comply with yielding requirements. Divided highway scenarios generate considerable confusion that results in numerous citations annually. The determining factor is whether a physical barrier separates opposing directions of travel. When a concrete barrier, guardrail, or substantial median exists between the lanes, drivers traveling in the direction opposite the emergency vehicle generally are not required to stop. The physical separation prevents any possibility of interference with the emergency vehicle's progress. However, when lanes are separated only by painted markings, a center turn lane, or grass median without physical barriers, both directions of traffic may be required to yield and stop. Many drivers assume incorrectly that any separation between opposing lanes exempts them from yielding requirements. This assumption has proven expensive for thousands of motorists who continued driving while emergency vehicles passed on the other side of an open median. The intensification of enforcement reflects broader public safety initiatives focused on protecting first responders. Statistical analysis conducted by transportation safety researchers has documented disturbing trends in emergency responder injuries and fatalities resulting from traffic incidents. Firefighters, paramedics, and law enforcement officers face substantial risk not only from the emergencies they respond to, but also from surrounding traffic that fails to yield properly. Secondary collision data has been particularly influential in shaping current enforcement policy. When drivers fail to yield completely, or when they resume driving too quickly, the resulting traffic disruptions contribute to crashes that injure emergency personnel and civilians alike. Lawmakers in multiple states have responded by increasing penalties and directing law enforcement agencies to prioritize these violations. Dashboard camera and body camera footage has transformed the enforcement landscape significantly. In previous decades, yielding violations often became disputes between drivers and officers over exactly what occurred. Contemporary recording technology provides objective documentation that resolves such disputes definitively. Drivers who contest citations may find themselves confronting video evidence that contradicts their recollection of events. The proliferation of move-over laws adds another dimension to this enforcement environment. Traditional yielding requirements apply when emergency vehicles are actively traveling toward an incident with lights and sirens activated. Move-over laws extend protection to situations where emergency vehicles have already stopped on the roadside. When drivers approach a stationary emergency vehicle with warning lights activated, they are required either to change lanes away from that vehicle, if safe lane changes are possible, or to reduce speed substantially, if lane changes cannot be executed safely. The specific speed reduction requirements vary by jurisdiction, but reductions of 15 to 20 miles per hour below the posted limit are common standards. Failure to move over or slow down appropriately for stopped emergency vehicles carries penalties comparable to improper yielding violations. In cases where such failures result in injury to emergency personnel, penalties increase dramatically and may include criminal charges rather than simple traffic citations. Older drivers face particular vulnerability in this enforcement environment, according to traffic safety advocates. Many seniors learned driving protocols decades ago and have not reviewed updated requirements since their initial licensing. Habits formed over 40 or 50 years of driving become deeply ingrained, and those habits may not align with current legal standards. Financial planning experts note that fixed-income retirees often structure their budgets with minimal flexibility for unexpected expenses. A $500 citation, potentially followed by increased insurance premiums lasting several years, can significantly disrupt carefully planned retirement finances. The compounding effect of citation costs, insurance increases, and potential traffic school expenses may total several $1,000s over time. Defensive driving courses designed specifically for senior motorists offer one solution to this knowledge gap. These programs review current traffic laws, explain enforcement priorities, and provide opportunities to discuss confusing scenarios with qualified instructors. Many insurance companies offer premium discounts to drivers who complete such courses, partially offsetting the time and expense involved. Psychological factors contribute to yielding violations in ways that surprise many drivers. The sudden appearance of flashing lights in a rearview mirror triggers stress responses that can interfere with clear thinking. Adrenaline surges prompt quick reactions that may not include all required steps. Drivers may move and slow down reflexively without consciously processing the need to stop completely and wait. Traffic psychologists recommend mental rehearsal as preparation for emergency vehicle encounters. By visualizing the correct sequence of actions during calm moments, drivers establish mental patterns that activate more reliably under stress. The rehearsed response replaces the improvised reaction, improving compliance rates significantly. Awareness of multiple emergency vehicle convoys represents another important preparation element. Major incidents frequently require responses from numerous emergency units, and these units often travel in close succession. A driver who stops appropriately for the first ambulance but accelerates immediately afterward may pull directly into the path of a second or third unit following closely behind. The correct practice involves scanning thoroughly before resuming travel, checking mirrors and surroundings for additional approaching emergency vehicles, and accelerating gradually rather than immediately after the initial vehicle passes. Communication within families about these requirements has become increasingly important. Younger drivers with limited experience may never have encountered emergency vehicle situations during their training. Parents and grandparents can share information about proper procedures and help newer drivers understand the seriousness of compliance. State Department of Motor Vehicles websites provide authoritative information about specific requirements applicable in each jurisdiction. Driver handbooks are updated regularly to reflect current laws and enforcement priorities. Consulting these resources periodically ensures that drivers maintain accurate understanding of their obligations. The broader pattern emerging in 2026 traffic enforcement reflects increased emphasis on accountability and documentation across all aspects of roadway safety. Agencies are leveraging technology more effectively, coordinating enforcement efforts across jurisdictional boundaries, and responding to public concern about preventable tragedies involving emergency responders. Revenue considerations, while present in any enforcement system, do not fully explain the current intensity of emergency vehicle yielding enforcement. The documented injuries and deaths among first responders have created genuine public safety imperatives that drive policy decisions. Communities that have lost firefighters or paramedics to traffic incidents, while those responders were assisting others, demand stronger protections. The fundamental message for all motorists is straightforward, despite the complexity of specific scenarios. When emergency vehicles approach with activated warning systems, the required response involves moving completely to the right, stopping entirely, waiting until conditions clearly permit, and then proceeding carefully. Each element of this sequence matters, and omitting any element may result in citation. The $500 penalty attached to these violations represents a significant financial consequence for incomplete compliance. When insurance effects are calculated over subsequent years, the true cost may multiply several times beyond the original citation amount. Protection against these consequences requires attention, preparation, and disciplined execution of proper procedures. The seconds invested in complete compliance yield substantial returns in avoided penalties and, more importantly, in contributed safety for emergency personnel performing essential public services. Every driver shares responsibility for creating roadway conditions that permit effective emergency response. When civilians fail to yield properly, response times increase, responders face unnecessary hazards, and people experiencing medical emergencies or fire incidents may suffer worse outcomes as a result. The connection between individual driving choices and community welfare deserves recognition. Proper yielding is not merely a legal obligation subject to enforcement. It represents participation in a system designed to protect everyone during their most vulnerable moments. As enforcement standards continue evolving, staying informed about current requirements remains essential. Traffic laws change, priorities shift, and practices that were acceptable previously may become violations under updated standards. Proactive attention to these developments protects both financial interests and community safety. The roads belong to everyone, including those who rush to help when emergencies occur. Yielding completely, stopping fully, waiting patiently, and proceeding carefully honors that shared space and the people who serve within it.